Hello, people. Thanks for coming to my channel. Just a quick word about live streaming. Um, it was something that I wanted to do periodically, but I've been genuinely pretty busy recently. So I don't want to set a time and then let subscribers down by not sticking to it. That's why I haven't done one for a while. But I will try and get around to that fairly soon and set a time. So if you can join, please do. Um, in my username, I use well, centrist philosopher. That's the username I go by. I'll just quickly touch on this because maybe new subscribers might be wondering about it. Um, Basically, it's two things. Firstly, it's unique. There's no other username like that. It's partly corresponding to my own thoughts on things. So the centrist part, which I'm going to be talking about in this video. Philosopher, well, it's kind of just sounds good. I don't see myself as a philosopher. I'm not that vain. I don't think I'm a wise sage. Uh, I think I'm pretty smart, but I don't, it's not like it just sounds good in conjunction with centrist philosopher. I think it has a kind of ring to it. So I came up with that I experimented with a few other things and I thought in the end that kind of worked. The centrist part is more less tongue in cheek and more sincere because I see myself as a centrist. What I mean by that is, and I know I've explained this before, so apologies to subscribers who have heard this before, but just for the benefit of anyone who's come, the way I see centrism is not, and I have to really underscore this, it's not about sitting on the fence. It's not about, oh, well, I'm just smack bang in the middle with politics and I don't have any strong views on things. I agree with everyone. Not at all. That's not what it's about. The way I see centrism is that it is sort of let's say, median of where my political views lie. So it's not that I am in the middle with every subject. There are some subjects I am definitely much more to the left or to the right, depending on the subject. Rather, the centrism is an overall kind of I fall broadly in that line. So I mean in that point. So for example, a subject like crime, I'm pretty conservative. I believe that people who hurt society have to pay a price, and I do believe in judicial punishment. So that's an area where I'd definitely be more on the conservative side of things. I do not agree with the liberal left that rehabilitation should be the first approach. I do not believe that society owes criminals anything. I believe that criminals owe society payback, not in terms of revenge, but in terms of facing justice. So that's definitely to the right. But there'd be some economic areas. For example, I strongly support the minimum wage, and I strongly support the right of employees to be treated fairly. Those are areas where I would be probably more aligned to the left. My thoughts on gun control, to me, that shouldn't be a left-right issue. That should be a common sense issue. But realistically, in American politics, for example, it probably is associated with the left. That's something I strongly believe in. I have huge sympathy for Americans who are trying to make a difference. I'm just using that as an example because, you know, um, the whole point of culture wars or the whole dynamic of culture wars tends to be something that originated in the United States, but it could be seen around the world, particularly in English-speaking countries. Um, I have to be honest, I don't know too much about the situation in continental European countries. To what extent, for example, are there culture wars in France or Germany, or other Western countries, outside the Anglosphere? Maybe there is a certain culture wars going on. In other societies, for example, China, it's a totally different dynamic. Leaving aside that it's a single party state, in terms of social discourse, there are actually debates in Chinese society, rigorous debates. I mean, okay, you can't criticize the government, but there are debates on the Chinese social media side of things where they will talk about issues around parenting and in music and popular culture and things like that, which are not that different from the West, but the restrictions are obviously the political side of things is a lot more sensitive. Um, and you get it all over the world on different levels. Um, but in the West, culture wars are very, very much, unfortunately, a thing. I say unfortunately because there's always been, in democracy, there has always, always, always been arguments, there's always been debate. And that's a good thing. Because without it, what would you have? You would have an echo chamber. You would have a single party just dictating everything, and people have to be subservient and agree. So I think it's healthy to have debate. I think it's healthy to have arguments. Um, Obviously, as long as it doesn't descend into violence or intimidation. But yeah, that's healthy. But that doesn't mean that the culture wars are necessarily a good thing because I think it goes beyond normal politics. It goes beyond simply saying, well, I have conservative views about this thing and you have left wing views about that thing, or whatever the case may be in terms of disagreeing with something. I think it goes beyond that. I think it's incredibly partisan for a start. And that's not a good thing when people are being partisan just for the sake of it. But I think that culture wars are something that's impacting every aspect of life. I mean, even people who are not political, like, or they don't see themselves as political, maybe they don't care what the president or prime minister's position is on a particular subject. They might not even vote. Um, they're apathetic to what's going on. Um, you know, Not just in their own country, but around the world. For them, like, people who might be interested in, well, their world revolves around what's the latest gossip on a reality TV show. I don't say this to be condescending, it's just a reality. Some people do have that outlook on life. I don't really understand it, but some people have that. But even people in that situation are impacted by the culture wars. Why? Because you get a dynamic now where certain narratives are being pushed, right? And it affects every single aspect of life, and particularly entertainment, actually. This is why people can't escape it, because people go to entertainment. They watch films, they go to the cinema, they watch sitcoms to escape, to just relax, right? But those things are now being particularly impacted by the culture wars because there are debates around representation. There are debates around racial identity politics. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. Um, I'm not saying that there's no room for those conversations. I'm not saying that, let's just not talk about those things at all. I do believe that there are people who are pushing a divisive narrative shamelessly. And the worst thing is they're doing it under the masquerade that it's some sort of progressive thing. Um, so what I want to do in this video is talk about how, as I see it, centrists, moderates, should approach the culture wars. In my opinion, I'm not telling anyone else what to think. This is just my view. Firstly, you need to know what you're for and what you're against. That's a given. And, again, this is something where centrists are not going to necessarily agree with each other. I have people who would also call themselves centrists, but I certainly don't agree with them on every area. But at least they're not partisan. At least they're not so dogmatic, as I try not to be, that I will simply support one side for the sake of it. And I'm quite content with the fact I'm not aligned to any political party. I'm not going to defend the Tories just because they take a certain position, or defend Labour just because take a certain position. And I think people who are so partisan that constantly feel this need to, it's kind of shackling. And actually, that is one of the drawbacks of party politics for anyone aspiring to get into the political system. To be a public representative in politics, it's one drawback about party politics. You kind of have to have that loyalty, and a certain degree of partisanism comes with that. whereby people are expected to defend their party. I mean, it's even a public expectation. Well, you're wearing a red rosette, so you have to defend Labour. You're wearing a blue rosette, so you have to defend the Tories. Or a yellow rosette, you have to defend the Liberal Democrats, and so on. Um, but I think within bigger parties, it is good to have a broad range of thoughts. Yet, at the same time, there has to be a certain direction. Otherwise, you just get like a million different views and nothing gets done. So that's one of the issues with party politics, and maybe that's more for a specific video. But there's overlap. There's overlap with the culture wars, because obviously politicians get drawn into it, and they're expected to take positions. Um, but I think that when people are pushing a certain narrative, I think one of the biggest problems now is people don't expect to be challenged, or they think that being outraged means that they cannot be challenged on their position. And I think it's one of the most frustrating and problematic issues that has come about from this, whereby you get people who say we are victims, or we are supposedly representing victims of some injustice. And I think the media has a very big part to play in this, because if you get a major network like CNN or the BBC, and they give people who are complaining, or people who are purporting to be victims or representing victims, if they just give them a platform to just pontificate about their victimhood or their sense of injustice, and they're not challenged, well, then you get an echo chamber of outrage. So I think that, big networks, I talk about CNN and the BBC because they're two of the biggest, but there's others as well. They have a responsibility of course, they have a responsibility to show both sides, and they have a responsibility to be politically neutral. Um, in the case of the BBC, I know the new Director General has specifically, really made that a priority. So I'll give him credit for that. But I think the BBC has some way to go. I do think it is institutionally biased to the left, unless you're a Corbyn supporter, in which you think it's just part of the conservative machine, which I think is just wrong. But that's what they believe. Um, so I think these big media networks have a very important role to play in this. If someone, I mean, take for example Black Lives Matter. Maybe not so much the BBC, but CNN just gives them basically a free platform. They're not challenged. What CNN will do is have a Black Lives Matter representative appear on their news hour, and you get anchors like Don Lemon and others, and they will just basically give them free rein to push their narrative. Now, to me, that's bad journalism. Another example of this is, again, I'm going to mention Don Lemon. It's not that I think with Don Lemon, he's a good example of the sort of arrogance that you get at that top level at CNN. You get it with others as well. Andrew Cuomo to an extent, Jake Tapper to an extent. I think it's institutional in CNN. But what I was going to mention was, when there was the whole thing going on between the Sussexes and the Windsor family in Britain, um, Don Lemon was saying, as an African American, I can totally relate to what she's saying. Um, he failed to do his job as a journalist by saying, this is what the Duchess is saying, this is what she says, but we haven't had an official statement from Her Majesty, right? So, as a journalist, he has a responsibility to say that this is her opinion, this is her perspective, it's not the fact. And I remember being pretty angry about that because, he's in a powerful position. He has an audience of millions. And what's he doing? He's pretty much promoting the idea. Well, yeah, Meghan Markle's telling the truth. The British royal family are racist. He didn't say it in like so verbatim, like the British royal family are racist, but he's pretty much endorsing what she says. That's bad journalism. For a senior journalist to endorse a public figure just because they agree with them. I think one of the problems on CNN, particularly, more so than the BBC, is that they have allowed kind of these opinion segments to dominate over simply reporting the news, right? So simply reporting the news would be the Duchess of Sussex made high profile interview today in which she claimed that a senior member of the royal family made racial comments about her son. That would be reporting the news. That wouldn't be taking a side. So that's just an example. Um, I'm realistic. In the world of journalism, you're going to have opinions. You get op-eds in newspapers, and you get opinion segments in broadcast media. And I think they have a place. I certainly wouldn't say, oh, that shouldn't exist. I think there is a place for that. But I do think in CNN it's far, far too dominant. I think they should greatly reduce the amount of time that is spent on those opinion segments. Um, the BBC actually isn't as obvious in that sense. People say the BBC is biased, and it is, but I don't think it's as obvious in that sense because you don't have necessarily like a particular news anchor and they have their own program and they're just opinionating for half an hour. So I don't actually think it's as bad here in that sense, but there is bias still come through in different ways. Anyway, getting back to the culture wars, I just think that when people are pushing a certain narrative, they have to be challenged. I mean, in a democracy, you can't say people cannot be offended if they choose to be. I think that the issue lies in okay, you're offended about this. You feel this is wrong. You feel this is unjust. You feel strongly about it. But the onus is on you to prove that. I think in America, for example, it is far, far, far too easy to charge racism. This is not to say that it isn't a problem. You know, I've seen videos of innocent black guys minding their own business. They're going for a jog or they're just walking around the block, minding their own business. And you get a white person, let's say a white woman comes out and she, you know, immediately panics and calls the police and so on. So there are situations like that. I'm not going to say that America doesn't have racial prejudice. I'm not going to say that there aren't situations that are unfair because there are. But I believe that the United States has come a very long way. Um, a journalist I respect, Melissa Chen, recently published, or she shared a poll. I forget what the source was, the which pollster it was, but it said something like 94% of Americans, 94% would be perfectly happy having a neighbor from another ethnicity. Now that's a very large proportion. Okay, there's a 6% um, that won't, but that's an example of why the situation is not actually as bleak as people think. And I think that certain influential bodies, certain influential movements like Black Lives Matter, but there's others, they will really home in on problems and they will exacerbate those problems to paint a much, much worse situation than is reality. So if you listen to Black Lives Matter, you would believe that America is this really racist country where you know, it's full of deranged white cops who are out to kill black guys, and black people are kept down, and that's it. But that's not the reality. It's not the reality because when you have police shootings, number one, there's white victims as well. That gets ignored. You'll never see CNN covering that, or at least it'll be minimal coverage. It ignores the fact that you get black officers who are involved in these situations. It ignores the fact that in some cases suspects are armed, in other cases they aren't. So I think that needs to be dealt with on a case by case basis. Um, and yeah, there is a problem with police accountability. I think one thing that's come out with the George Floyd issue is this this perverse thing about I think it's called qualified immunity. That needs to go. Police officers should not be above the law. So that absolutely needs to go. Um, but I just think it's very, very sad that we're in a situation where woke ideology is now controlling so much of public life. Now, before people are put off and think, oh, I'm only attacking the left here, I will come to the right. But for now, let me focus on the left. But this, it's come over to this side of the pond as well, because you have, for example, the University of Sheffield. I know I've quoted this before, but it's a good example. Paying students to monitor their peers for microaggressions. Now, why did they do this? They done this because some students complained that they were subjected to racial abuse. So, it seems to me the answer is obvious. Identify the culprits and reprimand or punish them. If it's racist bullying, I think they should be suspended. But to then have this collective policy of getting students to spy on each other, particularly over something as poorly defined as microaggressions, well, I mean, I just disregard the very idea of microaggressions. I think it's BS, to be quite honest. I mean, if you are going to have a panic attack because somebody asks you where you're from as a matter of conversation, frankly, you sound like a very sheltered individual. Um, but what's interesting about woke ideology, or ironic, is they claim that they're all about progress and about compassion and about being kind to each other. Now, that would be very nice if that was actually true, but when it comes to using insulting, polarizing terms like white privilege, especially a term I loathe, um, mansplaining, and there's a few other words that they know are provocative, they know are insulting, but they still do it. They still do it. So I would say if you're really about being kind, reaching out and being progressive, why are you deliberately using polarizing terms that offends people? Shouldn't it be consistent? If you're asking people not to be offensive, if you're asking people to be sensitive about their language, shouldn't you be sensitive about your language? I guess that's fine if it's thrown at people you don't like. So I just think that their hypocrisy is very obvious. I mean, let me just say for the record, I loathe woke ideology because I believe it is dishonest. I believe it's shackling. I believe it's counterproductive. And I believe it's fundamentally very divisive. I mean, if we take critical race theory, for example, which incidentally was coined by a white academic, this is the irony, um, you know, what it fundamentally comes down to is a very, very dystopian worldview. That all the problems that black people face must be the result of the white establishment. And then, by extension, the white establishment have to face this collective guilt. And Black Lives Matter says that's not their agenda, but their actions and rhetoric say otherwise. If you put them on the spot and say, "Oh, do you hate white people?" Of course they're going to say, "No, no, I don't," and they will point out that there's white supporters. But when they're pushing a narrative that black people are forever struggling and all white people are benefiting from privilege, let's just ignore homeless white people. Let's just ignore a struggling white family who might be in debt, who might be living in some rundown area. Um, I think it's frankly disgusting to say that you are part of the collective. You're going to be equally shamed. It's a very, very toxic way of looking at the world. I mean, that would be like treating all black people with contempt because there's a problem of black criminality in inner cities, and there is. Oh, but I can't say that as a white guy because that would be racist. You're stereotyping them, except that I'm not. I'm saying it's a problem. I'm not saying it's the whole. What we have to do is get to a point where there is honesty about problems and those problems are addressed, but they're not based on lazy generalizations. They're not based on sweeping statements. They're not based on inflammatory and divisive conclusions. That would be true progress. So that's why I really love woke ideology, because I think it's not progressive. I think it's counterproductive. I think it's dishonest, hypocritical. I don't like it. Not one little bit. But the other side of this is we now see a situation where you get very extreme zealotry on the right. A good example of this is Trump supporters who still will not accept democracy. They believe that Biden has been put in office by some sinister um, table of power. The tendency to get into conspiracy theories can be found on left and right, but I would say these days it's more obvious on the right, and I've got no respect for it. You know, um, just the fact that you could have a mob of people storming the Capitol building, and people could debate whether this was an insurrection or a riot or what. Point is, it was a very serious problem, and you get people defending that behavior. One of those who died that day, Ashley Babbitt, is being hailed in these circles as a hero. She wasn't. She was an extremist. The fact that she was former service personnel doesn't excuse her behavior. This was a woman who joined a mob who couldn't accept democracy, riled up by a demagogue who tried to force her way um, into a seat of power. You know, and just think that people that they would be so deluded that they would present the situation as somehow justified, that those rioters were patriots is grotesque. It shows that they are anti-democratic. Now, you might not like Joe Biden, that's fine. Good news. In just over 3 years, you have a chance to vote him out of office. I think the dangerous, unhinged way that they will not accept democracy. I don't like all of Biden's politics. I don't like his pandering to the woke left. So, the democratic approach is to challenge him, peacefully protest, to, to lobby senators and congressmen and women to hold him to account. That's the way to do it. Why does this matter? And why am I focusing on the United States? Because the United States of America is the most powerful country in the world, and what happens there has reverberations on other Western countries. I'm not saying we should be clones, but it has reverberations. Um, Particularly when you consider what's happening in our universities. But anyway, the point I was making about conspiracy theories, people who are so down that rabbit hole that they believe that COVID is all made up, or that the vaccines is some sort of plot by left wing billionaires like George Soros to keep the population in control. I I'm frustrated by their stupidity, but I actually feel kind of sorry for them to an extent. To an extent, because my sympathy falls away when they start getting aggressive and threatening doctors and nurses. Um, and we've had this on both sides of the Atlantic. That's when my sympathy falls away, or being callous. When I hear right wing conspiracy theorists insult grieving families who've lost loved ones to this deadly pandemic, when I hear them questioning if mass shooting survivors are crisis actors, I feel disgusted. And this is a domain of the right. Talking of the right, getting more local here, back to the UK, you do get a certain callousness on the right. Okay, you get this controlling intolerance with the woke left. That's true, but you also get the Katie Hopkins of this world on the right. Now, not only does this woman distort a lot of facts, but I think she's devoid of any human compassion whatsoever. She was recently rambling on about the fact that Afghans coming to this country will all be men. Well, the narrative there is about, we need to be wary about this because it's not women, they'll be potential terrorists. Well, of course, we should have vetting, but what Katie Hopkins failed to mention is some of these men will be translators who risk their lives for this country. Now, why shouldn't we help those people? The way she described migrants as cockroaches, I think she is definitely far right. And I do think there's a problem with the far right. Notwithstanding everything I've said about pan Islamism, and they need to have strict migration controls, all that. There is a very unpleasant, ugly side to far right ideology, and it is a problem. I don't think it's as big a problem as pan Islamism, but I think it's a problem. I love Trumpism. I mean, I don't know how any intelligent adult, even if you dislike the woke left, this is something I would say um, about Trump support. There's this kind of idea that, well, Trump is the guy to take on political correctness, to take on the woke left. But Trump's behavior as president, I think he's the worst president in my lifetime. I've no problem saying that. I struggle to see many achievements that he actually had. Um, Biden, it's too early to assess his legacy. But Donald Trump, I think almost everything Trump does is based on his own ego. But, they say he's strong for America. This is still relevant because he very well might run in 2024. He probably will. Well, this is a guy who praised the Russian dictator. This is a guy who flip flops his positions on China. Okay, on one hand, he's been tough, fair enough, but he also said that the concentration camps in Xinjiang sounded like a good idea. The thing I think that is most dangerous about Trump is his sheer ignorance on world affairs. This is someone who, in my position, should be nowhere near the White House. And I think America's reputation did suffer for the 4 years that he was there. I don't think he strengthened America. Um, Even if you allow for some of the things that he done, standing up to China when he done that, good. But I really don't think that Trump is good for America or the West. This is a man who's denigrated Western institutions to the point where he has negatively impacted the very process of democracy. I'm not saying that Trump can't criticize institutions. Hell, I've criticized institutions. I've criticized the BBC. I've criticized our justice system. But Donald Trump goes further than that. He gets into conspiracy theories. He promotes conspiracy theories. The man is dangerous. And I don't think any reasonable, intelligent adult should support him. I reject this idea that he is the natural opposition to the woke left. There are plenty of responsible Republicans, or at least there's some responsible Republicans, maybe not plenty. There are some responsible Republicans that will still make that argument, but they'd be far more statesmanlike than Trump was, or is, or will be. So this is the other side of it. I may have contempt for the woke left, but I also have contempt for the conspiracy pushing right and their callousness and their stupidity. I've no time for that. Um, so I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. It was a longer video, but I think there's a lot of important things to say here. What should centrists, moderates, how should they approach this? I think it's very important that we're not silent, that we not just accept what's happening here, because both these forces, I'm not saying in exactly equal measure, but they're both pushing a very toxic narrative and a toxic outlook on the world. So common sense has to be defended. It just has to be. Centrists aren't going to agree with everything, but at least we can agree that there are decent people on right and left. At least we can agree that a certain degree of working together is important. Not on every issue. I'm not suggesting every single issue should be bipartisan, but at least there should be some attempt to work together on important issues. Um, I think that you should never ever apologize for standing up for your values. I think you need to defend innocent people. So, and by you, I'm talking about me as well here. I'm talking about the general approach. If, for example, you get a public figure who's being unfairly maligned as a racist or something like that, then people need to defend them. If you get examples of callousness, conspiracy theories being pushed, they need to be challenged. And I think that Yes, never apologize for upholding your values, but also be careful to show that you have an approach. So, for example, if you're condemning the woke left, that's fine, I do, but make the caveat. Well, okay, I don't like this concept of microaggressions, but I agree that people can be civil to one another, that they can be respectful of other people's sensitivities on some level, right? That's reasonable. Um, you can say that you don't support Black Lives Matter, but you accept there is a problem with police brutality in some cases, and that needs to be held to account. And for the right, you can say that, you know, we do need to do something about anarchy and looting and the sort of problems with criminality. It's an issue. So I think there are ways to communicate that standards can be upheld, values can be upheld. One thing I will never ever do is apologize for my values, ever. If I'm misunderstood, I'll forcefully defend myself. That's another thing. Don't be afraid to defend yourself if you've been maligned or misunderstood. The reality is, not everyone's going to be reasonable with you. Anyway, I'll draw this up 36 minutes, which is my age, so it's probably a good point to draw up. I know I included a lot there, but I'm going to come to a point soon where I really, really, really want to do this long overdue review of my channel. So this is kind of a collective video. And I know maybe some of the things I've said have been provocative, but this is who I am. This is me upholding my values, and some of that means being candid about them. Okay, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts.